Well, what we have to do is at least just be conscious of the technology and be conscious of what's going on. And as long as we can be aware of it, then I think we can make better choices.
Welcome to the Breaking Muscle Podcast, where we bring you fresh ideas and perspectives from thought leaders across the health and fitness industry. I am Pete Hitzeman, your host and managing editor at BreakingMuscle.com. Every runner and cyclist will tell you that if it isn't on Strava, it didn't happen. CrossFit is built on the concept of quantifying work for comparison to others. As athletes, and indeed as human beings, we're fanatical about attaching a measurement to everything, and all the better if an app or a wearable fitness tracker can do that for us. Wearable device manufacturers and fitness app developers know this, and they're cashing in big time on our obsession with the quantified self. But is any of that making us any better as athletes or as people? Dr. Andy Galpin doesn't think so. He's the co-author of Unplugged, a new book about how our blind adherence to technology is handicapping us in some profound ways. Dr. Galpin is a professor of human bioenergetics at Cal State Fullerton, author of countless studies on physiology and sports performance, and has coached scores of elite professional athletes. He and I discuss the philosophical underpinnings of his scientific approach, what technology can do for and against us, and how our relentless pursuit of comfort has caused no end of problems for us as a species. Dr. Galpin believes that we all need to disconnect from our reliance on GPS watches and other wearables and reconnect with our bodies, our senses, and nature. Before we get into the interview, I just want to say thank you to all the listeners who have jumped on board with the show through our first 20 episodes. We've got some great feedback and are happy to bring you the kind of interviews and information you're looking for. If you've enjoyed the show so far, be sure to subscribe and leave us a rating and a review on iTunes. If you have any feedback or ideas for the show, be sure to email them to editorial@breakingmuscle.com. Joining us today on the Breaking Muscle podcast is a Zumba instructor and purveyor of fine GMO-free fair trade BCAAs. No, I'm kidding. Dr. Andy Galpin is joining us. You probably know him from his work on Barbell Shrugged and a host of other projects. He is a professor of human bioenergetics, which I had to practice saying, at the Center for Sport Performance at Cal State Fullerton, and co-author of a new book called Unplugged, and he's here to tell us all about that in his research into why technology isn't making us better at anything. So, Dr. Galpin, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, man, it's my pleasure to be here. I think one of the first lay publications I ever did was for Breaking Muscle like 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah, I actually went and dug that up, and real top-down view of how to make your muscles less sore after a workout, which is still good content.
Yeah, I think it's like 3 or 5 ways to be less sore after a workout or something like that.
Yeah. So, real quick, let's talk about your background, and then we'll touch on your co-authors before we get into the book itself. You're not just a researcher, and you're the kind of dude, if I saw you on the street, I'd have a hard time putting you in a lab coat, behind goggles, right? So, you were an athlete in a whole bunch of different sports first, and a coach, and then a research scientist, I don't want to say recently, but a research scientist later.
Yeah, that's fairly true. I also get the question oh my God, how old are you? That's that's not what I thought to be a scientist with all these publications and stuff.
Right.
I played everything possible growing up as a kid. I grew up in the country, so we did everything. I was fortunate to play college football and win a national championship, and then started competing in weightlifting or Olympic weightlifting, and competed for a national championship there, and then really took to combat sports. So a lot of boxing, kickboxing, MMA, jiu-jitsu, stuff like that. And I've been working with kids. When I was in high school, I started coaching my teammates and through lifting, and that really carried on through college. And now I'm fortunate enough I've done everything from set up obesity, diabetes, and nutrition clinics for Native Americans in the Northwest. So those folks are struggling with alcoholism, obesity, and diabetes, and so I set up nutrition and exercise programs for them. I worked in a chiropractor's office. I worked in an acupuncturist's office doing basically wellness for anyone that came in there. And then I've coached NFL athletes, world champions, UFC fighters. So, I mean, I've really run the gamut in a lot of ways of human performance. So one of my goals in my career is to do as much or more what we'll call outreach to the public as I do actual science. So for me, a study that gets done in my lab that I publish that no one reads, it's not really helping the world at all. So I try to make sure that I take the information that we get and translate it to the public in a fashion that they can actually implement it.
Yeah, and one of the things, it's interesting to look at what you do through the lens of your background, right? Because a lot of people in your field have this very narrow linear path. They decide early on, I'm going to school for this, I'm going to study this, and then I'm going to research it, and that's going to be my thing. And you came at it from 50 different angles, and so you're able to relate a lot of the work that you do to broader populations. And the result of that from the years that I've followed your work has been you're almost agnostic as to approaches. You're like, well, this is a thing that you can do, and it'll work for this, but I don't care if you do this because you can do these 5 other things too.
Yeah, that's actually one thing that you can ask any of my students or former students about how frustrating it is to be in my class and figure out what the right answer is.
Yeah.
I actually, one semester at the end, the last day of class, I had a bunch of students bring in a bunch of diapers to class, and they gave it to me, and I said, what is this for? And they said, because the answer to everything apparently is, it depends.
Yeah, when I was in the Air Force, I went out to the weapons school out at Nellis in Las Vegas, and that is the answer. I mean, everything is situational, when it comes to weapons employment. So the answer is always, it depends.
Yeah, right. I mean, like early on in my life, and I just was always irritated. Like I never believed why someone would be so dogmatic about anything. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that was because for whatever reason I was born or developed this desire to be unique myself. And so because of that, I'd always think, like, when 15 or 20 or 30 people are all saying the same thing, well, can we look at this from a different perspective? And then I started to realize, this is over years and decades of work. And when you do that enough, when you look at things from as many perspectives as possible, you really realize that there is very little fundamental truth. There's very, very few facts. I get asked to do these all the time for websites and magazines. Like, will you share the 5 biggest myths about diet or whatever? And I'm like, that's stupid. It's not helpful because it's impossible. I mean, there's very, very few things that I would never implement as an exercise or as a nutrition strategy, given enough different circumstances. So I don't think those conversations are helpful. I think it's better to sit back and say, okay, let's examine this workout style or this nutrition program or this recovery or this modality. Let's examine what potential benefit it has, and let's examine what the potential cost is. And if we give people that information, then they can say, well, here's my situation. I've got A, B, C, and D going on. Therefore, I think this approach would be the best starting place for me. And to me, that's just far, far, far more helpful to get people to actually reach their goals. It may be less helpful in getting clicks, but it gets people to actually what they need health-wise. So that's what I'm concerned with.
Well, I think there's a hunger for the truth, and to paraphrase what you've said before, science is the reduction of misunderstanding, more than this hard pursuit of singular truths.
Yeah, science is not a noun, right? It's an action, like it's a verb. Like science is something you are doing. It's not a thing. Right. So when someone says like, well, the science says. And I was like, well, the science is saying, like, it may say something later in a year, and it depends on what you look at. It's Karl Popper, the philosopher, who said, it's just a reduction in uncertainty. That's all science is. Yeah. So if I have 10,000 people listening and they all say, okay, hey, what should I do diet-wise? Well, I don't know what's absolutely true, but I can say, based on all the evidence we have and all my practical years of experience and all my experts, friends that are in the field, I can reduce the uncertainty that says most likely, hey, if you eat a lot of different plants and vegetables and animals and things like that, you're probably going to be in a good spot. And I can't ethically prove that's totally true, but I can reduce the unlikelihood that it's wrong by continuing to add more research. So that's all it is. I mean, I'm a scientist, so it sounds like I'm shooting myself in the foot here. But like I can tell you that like that's, and generally there's the Dunning-Kruger curve, where like the more advanced you get into an expertise, the more you back off with certainties.
Yeah. The more you learn, the less you realize you actually know.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So you've written a lot of things, been published in a lot of different journals and websites and all that stuff. This is your first effort at a book, then, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And it would have never, ever, ever, ever came about had Brian McKenzie and Phil White, and particularly Phil, came about it. Phil was the real guy that hit the keystrokes for the most part.
Okay.
So Brian approached me about the book, and I'm like, dude, there's no way I have time to tackle a book.
Right.
But the topic was so timely, and I felt like it was so important. And once I sat on it for a while, I realized like this is something that really has a chance to impact a lot of lives, and it's something that is really, really, really needed. And I just couldn't pass that up. I felt an obligation almost. So I put some things scientifically and personally on the back burner, and about 10 months ago, just dove right in and knocked this thing out.
Awesome. So let's touch real quick on the people you worked with on the book. Brian McKenzie, formerly of CrossFit Endurance, now owns Power Speed Endurance and several other enterprises that are busy making people into more awesome people. I'm not familiar with Phil White.
Phil he's been nominated for 2 Emmys.
Oh, wow.
He's got a number of bestsellers, so he's a writer in this space. He's co-wrote books for a lot of people that you'd be very familiar with. So he's a very accomplished writer. So yeah, he jumped on board for that.
Great. So one of the things to segue from that, one of the things I noticed, the book itself is physically beautiful. Like it's a hardcover and it's got these big, thick, glossy pages. Like it feels like a really good book. And I heard you tell somebody else, don't get the Kindle, get the real book because there's a lot of focus been put into the tactile quality of it. And the writing is very good as well, which in our profession is not common. I'm sure you know. There are a lot of really, really good information that's spoiled by terrible writing is what I find as an editor.
And that's actually funny you said that because a couple of things. One, that's Phil all day.
Okay.
Phil is epically talented as a writer, and I'll back up even a quick second. So when they first asked me to do the book, I said no, and Brian said, well, you just hop on a phone call with this guy Phil, just talk whatever comes up and see what happens. And so I talked to him on the phone for like an hour, and then 6 days later or something, 5,000 words showed up, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I get it now. This is how we could do this.
Yeah.
He's extremely talented, but the writing style was very specific and very, 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 very different for me. So I'm a scientist. I'm used to writing things for the scientific community, and we specifically wanted to do this. We almost wrote the book oratorily. So it reads almost like you would speak.
Yes.
And we did that very intentionally, and it hurt my heart a little bit, I'm not going to lie. But like we wanted to really write this so that every single person who picked it up could read right through it, and we wanted you to start reading it and go like, I'm going to knock this out in one day. And we've had a lot of people buy it, get it in one day, 2 days later be like, I finished it because I couldn't put it down, and it was just so easy to read and it flowed. So we wanted good, awesome, epic information there, but we wanted this to read for the average everyday person. So that was, again, to Phil's credit, but that was also very specific, as well as the images, the paper quality, the color schemes. We spent a lot of time on that, and so it's really like an experience. It's not a super cheap, crappy pages that you'll flip through and you'll bend over. It's something we would imagine that once you invest your $25 in or $20, which it's actually on sale for 40% off right now.
I see that.
Which is a great thing. So yeah, we spent a lot of time crafting that so it would stand out a little bit from your average everyday $12.99 book.
You said you wanted the book to be kind of addicting to read, which I definitely appreciated. This is one of the books. My measurement for what a good book is that it makes me late for work. Because I do a lot of reading in the morning or before I go to bed, and if it keeps me up, that's kind of just annoying because I need to go to sleep. But if it makes me late for like an appointment, this is that book. I'm like, I've got to finish this chapter. I have to. I want to see where it's going. So anyway, enough about gilding the lily there. One of the things that captured me from the beginning, and as somebody who basically reads people's fitness stuff all day, it's not a hard science book, and it's not just a diatribe against fitness technology. It's as much philosophy and psychology, sports performance, health. Like, you guys cover a lot of ground in not that many pages. Talk about how you kind of the three of you sort of developed what your approach was going to be to this topic?
Well, that's also was very interesting. We spent a lot of time on that, and we honestly didn't know. We just started writing, and we just started going, because you mentioned that not wanting to do a diatribe. That's exactly what I didn't want to do when they first approached. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to write an anti-technology book, because whenever you do that, you lose. Technology is here. It's not going anywhere. We're going to get crushed, and everyone's wrote a book already about 10 ways to not check your cell phone as much. And, the 3 reasons why you need to stop getting on Facebook. And I'm like, people have covered that. That's not what's needed. And so we wanted to go the opposite direction, which is to say, this technology is here. It's not realistic. You're not going to cancel your Instagram account. Let's not even advocate for that. Let's go somewhere entirely different. And let's talk about how to actually appropriately use technology so that it doesn't ruin your fitness, your performance, or your consciousness. And what we found is it's a problem now, but it's about to be an epically uncontrollable problem as robotics, as artificial intelligence take over the rest of our lives. Mm-hmm. And if you don't think that that's happening, I mean, not only is it happening, it's here, and it's going to be here in probably the next presidential administration, if not sooner. So that's how close we are to having what it fundamentally means to be a human being changed forever.
Yeah, and as a tech nerd, I'm watching the development of the actual devices in the industry, right? And I've been in the computer industry for 12 years. And computers and personal devices like cell phones, the curve of technology development is sort of plateauing a little bit. We've reached the point with processor capacities and storage capacities where it's like, yeah, you don't really need more than what you have now, so the attention has turned to software and apps and things like that. But wearables, like fitness trackers, like I have an ancient fitness watch by today's standards. It doesn't Bluetooth, it doesn't like live upload, I don't have Strava segments on it, like it doesn't even really do maps. So, and that's only 3 or 4 years old. The new stuff is like incredible full color displays, and it practically makes your post-ride shake for you. Like,
right.
Yeah, the leaps forward, and we're not done. Like the stuff that's coming down the pipe with sweat sensing and
exactly
full body biometric suits, it's coming, and it's going to become ubiquitous. So like you say, we have to get a hold mentally on what we're going to do with all that when it hits.
Yeah, we had a real problem. Brian McKenzie, that one of the authors, coming from the sport performance perspective, especially with runners and cyclists and the endurance athletes he's worked with, and myself coming from the college football setting, NFL setting, Major League Baseball, but then also, my wife and the people that I'm around, my mom, my aunt, I just got incredibly frustrated watching them spend $400 on a new wearable watch, and number one, they stop using it after a few months, or it turns into just a watch. Mm. And number two, I continually saw it actually ruining their fitness goals. So they were gaining more weight. They were getting worse and worse and worse. And so that's the real problem I wanted to address in the book, is to say, here for the everyday person, do you need this wearable? Do you need to invest $300 or $400 or $600 in it? How can you use it to really help you? And then what are the pitfalls that people fall into where it actually compromises their thing? So one quick example is it can give you a false sense of health. So what that means is you wear your wearable, it tells you, hey, you got your goal, your steps are in, or your physical activity is great. Oh, okay, fantastic. Therefore, I don't need to go do exercise. Or therefore, I'm going to treat myself to some extra food or a snack because I reached my 10,000 steps. And that's fundamentally the exact opposite approach of what you need to use those things for, and that can actually cause detriment. The other thing it can do is it can loop you into this negative feedback loop where it's sort of like, well, I didn't get my steps today, therefore I must have failed. And then, I didn't hit my steps today, I must have failed. And you're just continually fail after fail after fail. So it can have what we would call an effect on your consciousness, or your awareness, or your psychology, or however you want to look at it from whichever perspective. But that's where we wanted to jump in really and be like, this is not helpful for some of you folks. You would have better spent that $400, spending $100 meeting with a nutritionist, buying a solid $30 a month nutrition plan or something like that, and working with an individual coach, spending $100 on a real good coach, something like that. You would have gotten put in a much better place. So that's one very small example, but we wanted to be able to give people actual tools and guidance for this is what to do and this is what to watch out for, and here are the common mistakes.
Yeah, I think that what you touched on there, the priority of your fitness dollars is the big thing. Like for me, I have sort of decided that unless somebody gives me one, which might happen, but I'm not going to buy a power meter for the bike.
Right.
Because they're really expensive, and they basically tell you what you already know, which is that you don't make enough power and you should work on making more.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that $1,200, if I spent that on some coaching or a couple of cycling camps, I would come out a way better rider than if I did just bolting something else onto my already expensive bicycles, and having to worry about one more piece of data and keeping it charged and doing all those things.
Well, that's the other thing is you sort of alluded to it right there, but that's the data overload. Mm-hmm. Especially for athletes, we see this constantly in what I would call the weekend warrior athlete, if you will. You end up collecting so much data that you have no concept what to do with any of it. And I have worked with a lot at this point of technology companies, consulting and things like that, and I can tell you would be shocked at how inaccurate they are. I mean, even the big ones, even the billion-dollar ones, they change their algorithms all the time. They change how their numbers work. And so what told you that you're at 60%, the exact same work on your part, that number might tell you you're at 72% tomorrow or 48%. I mean, that's how big that those things change.
Right. We just published a thing a few weeks ago about heart rate monitoring and how it's, especially wrist-based monitors, are just terrible. Like, they're not even in the ballpark. And that's a very it's a heart rate, for crying out loud. It's a very basic metric. We're not trying to get anything complicated, but they're still screwing it up. So
I mean, exactly. That's a huge point. And I can't remember the exact numbers, but the amount of dollars that were spent on wearables just last year alone went up by like 90 million. I mean, it's just exploding, and people are just dropping $300 a pop, and now the numbers are coming down, and now maybe it's $100 a pop. But still, the bigger point that you make there is, like, this is completely inaccurate. If you look at the data and the science on it, it's particularly inaccurate at higher heart rates. Mm-hmm. Like, well, that's the thing I care about to begin with.
Exactly. Especially, if you're one of the people that I train has a problem with tachycardia. Like, his heart rate runs away from him. So he needs some pretty solid feedback on what his heart rate is to make sure that he doesn't get, dead.
Yeah. I don't care if my heart rate's at 120 or 125. That's not important.
Right.
But if I'm at 170, 175, that's a bigger deal.
Absolutely. So let's talk about data itself. And the sort of quantified self that comes up a lot in the book. So we're quantified literally from before birth. Like, now we're measuring fetuses in utero to see how they're doing for reasons. You're born, you're weighed and measured. Every 5 months you go to the doctor, you're weighed and measured, blood pressure, heart rate, height and weight, all this stuff. So we're sort of told by everybody who everybody who purportedly is an expert that you need to match these numbers. Is that useful? Are we actually doing anybody any favors with all of that measuring?
Well, it's really tough to say, but here's what I can guarantee you is it can be harmful, and it can be harmful a lot. I don't know if this has come out since the book came out, but if you're familiar with the CRISPR technology, mm-hmm. or the gene editing stuff, and they just came out that they've officially now done that in human embryos for heart disease. So they're able to go in there, and what this means, if you're not familiar, for the first time ever, you can actually go in selectively cut out a gene and select a new gene to replace it, and that they were able to identify some that had a strong relationship with some form of heart disease, and they cut it out in the embryo and put another one back in, and this is already out. Like, this is not sci-fi, folks. Like, this has been done in humans.
Yeah.
So, now the nice part about it is you can't go in there and add something in that wasn't already in the mother's genome.
Okay.
So I can't take you and make you 7 feet tall or something if your mom's 5'4". So, like genetic engineering the babies thing is a little bit out there, but the ability to mix and mold a lot of the genome, it's not sci-fi. It is here. So we really have to start to question all these things that we're taking. At what point do we stop being organic, true, natural combinations into these very unique living beings, and at what point are now we just programmed?
Well, and one of the things, that I've noticed we're very bad at as humans in general is unintended consequences, right? So you substitute out that gene, but like genes are complicated and they do a lot of things. So you might have fixed one problem and created six more.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So we can go even further down this rabbit hole if you want, but you have to realize, and this is part of the book that you will get, where we talk about having to engineer suffering and manufacture discomfort. And so what I mean by that is, I promise I'll circle back to your point here. Let me lay some foundation.
Sure.
For our entire species' existence, we have focused centrally on reducing suffering. Now, this is a good thing, right? I want to reduce the chances of me getting really cold, really hot, really hungry. I want to make sure I have shelter. Okay, then let's develop a community. So you go hunt and you go build, and then you take care of the kids. Okay, well, that's going to reduce the likelihood of any one of us going hungry. Okay, let's get bigger. Well, now let's actually add in our agriculture and farming. Let's make cities. And all this has been done to reduce the likelihood of suffering. And because of this, I mean, you know what the human population is right now?
It's 7 billion or something like that.
Okay, close enough. Do you know what it was 100 years ago?
Like 4. It's gone.
Like 1.
Yeah.
Okay, so we went from like 1.5 to 7.5, or plus or minus here, in 100 years.
Right, exponential growth.
Right. The reason that happened is because we exploded in our ability to sustain abundance, specifically with food, right? Technology, transportation. So what I'm getting at here is we have spent our entire life as a collective species trying to reduce suffering, increasing abundance. We actually did it now, but we didn't step back initially to ask ourselves, well, is that the right thing to hope for in the first place? Like, should we be striving to reduce suffering? And previously we should have, but now, because we have been so effective at that goal, we need to go the opposite, which is engineer and go after suffering. Mm-hmm. Example, what is exercise? Exercise in general is just a stupid way to engineer some suffering. Now, everyone knows that, right? Okay, I know I need to exercise. And that's been true because, prior to particularly World War II, no one had to choose any fasting. No one had to do any cold plunges. We didn't have to push away dessert from the table because there was never that much excess.
Right.
Now, past the 60s and 70s, it started to get there. And if you look at what happened with things like the RDA and the dietary recommendations, we never had to put restrictions on things like sugar or volumes until the 70s and 80s and 90s because there was never enough food. Like, hey, if you had dessert in the 50s, go ahead, eat as much as you want because it just wasn't likely that it was going to be around that often for it to matter.
Yeah, it'll be 6 months before you have a piece of cheesecake again. So
Exactly. You don't have it, or you don't have the money. There's no extra income. Well, the world has gotten relatively so much cheaper. Well, again, here, at least in the first world countries, that now that abundance is in your face. You can have that cheesecake any second. You're never more than a mile away from cheesecake, right?
That is the measure of modern society, your proximity to cheesecake. Like, if you're less than a mile from cheesecake, you do not have it that bad.
Yeah, and not only do you have abundance, but you've got abundance in extreme convenience. Now you can click on one thing on a button and it'll be there in Amazon Prime in an hour. And so we have got to develop a skill set that's totally different from what our parents had to develop. We're living in a world that just doesn't even compare to what they had because of the risk of abundance and convenience. So as we move forward, people are recognizing the need to exercise. We've known that for 30, 40 years. But what other aspects of suffering do we need to bring about because they're now gone from our life? Enter things like cold. Enter things like hot. We have specific molecules. There are proteins in your body called heat shock proteins. There's cold shock proteins. And these are molecules, enzymes. We've got genes for this. We've got proteins for it. Any level of the molecule or the gene we've got that are specifically designed to be activated under extreme circumstances like cold or hot, depending on what they are. Now, as a byproduct of them being activated, they also do things like clean up cellular debris. They break down misfolded or misfunctioning proteins. They tear away cells that are growing uncontrollably as a result. So what happens when we live in a world that is extremely convenient with food, we overeat, right? Physical activity is basically completely gone because of robotics and lifestyle technology. So we've replaced physical activity with basic get your 10,000 steps in, right? But we have yet to replace the extreme vigor of physical activity, right? In other words, exercise. We are used to going, and there are major benefits to going periods of fasting. Mm-hmm. So you have a lot of your physiology that responds extremely well to going through periods of fasting, and yet we never go through that. Well, the same thing happens with extreme temperatures, extreme fatigue, extreme hydration. And this is really what, circling back to your question here, finally getting to your answer, is we have got to put ourselves in an infrastructure that says our molecules are actually optimized. So our biology is best when it is challenged in a variety of ways, and it is challenged frequently. And we have completely outstepped that entire balance. So we have one of two options at this point. We can either turn into Dr. Manhattan and rid ourselves and get rid of all biology and live as like energy beings. I might sign up. Don't get me wrong. Or we have to, because we're going to have to let the biology go. Or if we want to keep the biology, we're going to have to find a way to continually introduce this suffering back into it, because we just don't function without that stress.
Yeah, I've heard the analogy used, and it rings very closely for me. I have a long background in aircraft maintenance, and airplanes, when you let them sit on the tarmac, fall to pieces. They rust, the tires go flat, engines start leaking, everything's bad. An airplane works best while it's doing the thing it was designed to do, flying through the air, even for long periods of time. And our machines, our bodies were built to react to a whole bunch of different stimuli and solve a lot of different problems and move in a lot of different ways, and we're doing none of those things now, as you've just explained. So yeah, no wonder we have all these problems. You know, the system isn't being used, so things are atrophying and things are building up and breaking down and rusting and decaying while we're walking around.
We have to, another part of the book is we have to understand this dichotomy between optimization and adaptation. So when you're doing one, you're not doing the other.
Okay.
So if you're walking around all the time optimizing, that almost always means you're not adapting. So we have to be careful about walking around saying, okay, well, I'm going to maximize my sleep all the time, and then I'm going to wake up and I'm going to have my extra caffeine in the morning to optimize, and I'll have my nootropic, and I'll have my 17 supplements, and then I'll make sure that I reduce, the amount of movement I have to do. So I'll build an office 4 feet away from my kitchen. I'll make sure I have 7 screens, and all we're doing is optimizing. And then we end up with things that are diseases of abundance. So whether these are physical diseases, or they're emotional diseases, or any of these problems we have, these are issues of abundance. The other end of the spectrum is adaptation. So as you challenge the system, you adapt. But if you don't challenge the system, you don't adapt. So we're going to have real problems because we're going to become desensitized to all those stimuli, which is going to ruin our physiology and at some point ruin your consciousness.
There's sort of an argument that is an illustration at this point. There's an argument in the mountain bike community about how mountain bikes have developed over the past 15 or so years. And now it's, 29-inch wheels or 27.5 plus of these big, huge tires. We've got disc brakes and full suspension and dropper seat posts and all this cool stuff. And now there's electronically assisted mountain bikes, which is a huge raging debate. And the trails have changed to allow for different styles of riding, that these big new, and the bikes only weigh 20 pounds. It's just crazy. But nobody's actually becoming a better mountain biker, right? Because they have a ridiculous amount of traction and a bike that's super, super light, and in some cases giving them mechanical assistance to ride up and down hills. So we've optimized the machine and adapted 0% of ourselves.
Exactly. Now I'm sure you don't follow sailing much, but
a little. My dad's a big fan.
Okay, well then you may have heard of this, but I think it was the American Cup that just happened a few weeks ago. And I don't follow a tremendous amount of sailing, but this is my father-in-law's life, so
okay.
I get to hear about it all the time.
Yeah.
But what happens, most folks don't realize, is these sailboat racing things, the sailboat will go 99% of the race, which is like a 20-minute race, without ever actually touching the water.
Right.
So they're cruising along, basically, they're foiling and they're in air almost the entire time. Well, New Zealand won this year in dominating fashion because what they did is, in this particular style of racing, electronics are not allowed. So you have to use your human power, in this case hydraulic pumps, to shift your sails and steer. Well, what they did is they engineered, so how that normally works is you have 6 or 8 sailors on the boat, and you have kind of like a captain or making decisions, and then the rest of the people are taking these little hand cranks, and they're cranking back and forth as hard as they can to raise the sail and move it back and forth. Well, the New Zealand team brought in like 4 or 5 Olympic cyclists, and they built in basically bikes on each side, and so I think 4 or 5 of the sailors only All of them just sat in their bikes, head down the entire race, cranking, cycling through the entire thing.
Wow.
And they dusted everybody. They crashed. They smashed everybody.
Because they just switched from using arms to legs. They're like, oh, well, we can crank harder.
Well, more importantly, they took sailors off the boat.
Yeah.
And they put Olympic cyclists in the boat.
Yeah, who already have that physiological system developed.
That know nothing about sailing.
And don't have to.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so they've actually changed the rules for the next one and said, like, basically you can't do this because only one person's sailing on your boat. The other members don't even know what sailing is. They just get on there and ride a bike.
Hopefully they taught them to swim at least.
Maybe. Those things don't tip, so.
Well, they break, though. I've seen them, like,
yeah.
The hulls are carbon fiber, and they just, stuff happens.
But the point is, with all of these things, I mean, we're going to have to really fundamentally get to a point where we just say, you know what, like, we're just going to have to do all of our races naked. Like, this is it. You get no gear, you get nothing else. We saw this happen in the Olympics with the swimmers and the suits, right?
Yep.
And I think David Epstein made this point very, very clear in his great book, The Sports Gene, that we're really arguably not getting that much better physically. In very many of our sports, we're just getting better with our technology. So the numbers keep going up, but are we really getting better at sailing? I don't think we necessarily are. The actual skill of maneuvering a boat in the open water, I don't know if it's improved that much, although we're actually completing the course faster.
Yeah, who was the sprinter? Was it Justin Gatlin? They put in period shoes from Jesse Owens and had him run a 100 meter.
Andre DeGrasse.
Andre DeGrasse, right. And he couldn't. Now, in fairness, he probably wasn't peaked or rested and probably didn't have any time to practice in the shoes, but still.
And he probably didn't care.
And he probably didn't care. But it was illustrative. I mean, the parable remains true, whether the details were or not.
Right.
So let's go back to the quantification of self for a second. We've got recommended daily allowances for vitamins, and we've got doctors. My personal experience, my doctors are always yelling at me that my LDL is too high, even though everything else is perfect. Mm-hmm. And we've got apps that will quantify every single aspect of your diet, from your caloric intake to your macronutrients to everything else. Why is all of this data not useful? Why we have all this data, people are not getting healthier? Where's the disconnect?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. It can be useful. And the basic way I'll say it is, technology as a general statement is pretty good for calibration. So for example, you come to me and you say, hey, I want to lose some weight, and I say, all right, well, how many calories a day are you eating? The vast majority of Americans don't have any clue what 2,000 calories looks like or 3,000 calories. They don't have any idea what 100 grams of protein is. And studies have been done on this, but you can even just imagine if you did like a Jimmy Kimmel skit and you went out to the streets of Hollywood and asked people, and you put a plate in front of them and said, how many calories is on this plate? How many grams of fat is in this plate? Like, the numbers would just be outrageously funny. So if you used an app like that, and maybe there's an app that you just take your phone and you scan your plate, take a picture, and it comes back and it tells you your numbers. Now, that app's going to be terribly wrong. Like, I could just tell you right now, it'll be 20% wrong, maybe more. But maybe 20% wrong is a lot better than your 80% wrong.
Yeah.
So you could say that's good, or you can say that's bad. You could say 20% wrong, that's huge, that's totally inaccurate. Or you could say, yeah, but it's a lot closer than what the average everyday person says, and I would support that argument. So it might mean not to be the worst thing if you just get somebody roughly calibrated. They don't know if they're eating 800 calories or 4,000 calories or anything. And what I have found, and I've done a tremendous amount of this, even with my graduate students. So these are folks getting master's degrees in human performance. And you'll look at their 7-day food log. So they track all their food for 7 days. And they'll see just extreme variation. So one day they'll eat 300 calories, or the next day they'll eat 2,800, and the next day it's 1,100. And so you could use the technology to be like, wow, I didn't realize why I'm going through all these energy flux and why I'm tired all the time. Well, that's because you're changing stuff all over the place. You're not being consistent. The body is really freaking out all the time. So I think apps in this particular case, and we're just using this one example, it could be any technology though, I think they're very, very, very good to help even a high-level athlete become calibrated. All right, so if we use that power app on your bike and we put it back on there and we said, hey, I want you to be at 800 watts, I don't know what that means. Okay, roughly I'm close. Whether it's 800 or 650 doesn't really matter. I know what that number feels like now. The problem with that, though, is when you try to use it as an exact number, right? This is one of our major issues, is saying, well, no, the app says I should be at 1100, or the app says I should be here. And you're not actually paying attention to how you're feeling. Because there is an app like that, or science in general, is pretty good across huge numbers of people, but it's terrible within the individual person. But you, my friend, are the individual person.
Well, and not just the individual person, but the individual circumstances. Like,
Yes.
you know, for me, going to run a 10K when it's 55 degrees outside and beautiful is a very different physiological experience from when it's 90 degrees and there's a headwind for half the course.
And when you wanted to go out and do the run because you're really excited, versus when you're doing the run because you feel like you have to because you don't want to be fat, or you don't want to feel lazy. All that, one thing that the apps will never get, even artificial intelligence will never get this, that's context.
Mm-hmm.
They don't understand the context of what else is going on in your life. You know, are you running to release stress? Are you running because you actually like it? Are you running because you hate it and it's a punishment? These numbers will never understand it. Or these apps will never understand that context. And so what's going to continually happen is you might see some slow progress for the first 90 days, but then motivation will wane. And we see this consistently with the apps, that someone will get extremely motivated because it's going to be basically gamified, right? So you imagine any of these cell phone games, Candy Crush, or what was the one that people were killing themselves on last year? Oh, Pokemon
Go?
Yeah. Cool. Well, you know why no one plays that anymore? Because people are super excited for the first 90 days to play things like that, and you'll get very addicted. I want to do one more level. Well, motivation like that actually wanes very, very quickly. And so if you set yourself up and you use these technologies to give yourself motivation from those perspectives, after 90 days, roughly, that motivation is no longer insightful and enticing anymore. Mm-hmm. And this is why people buy these things, and 90+% of people who buy heart rate monitors or fitness apps don't use them after 6 months.
Well, that's actually an older phenomenon than the fitness app thing, right? So in the cycling industry, there's a similar statistic that 90% of bicycles end up just hanging in a garage. People buy the thing, the device, the external thing, and think it's going to motivate them to go change their lives. And the first problem is that nobody spends enough on their bicycle to actually have a good bicycle, and that's a whole separate topic. But the second problem is they're not actually psychologically ready to make that life change. Yep. And so they ride the bike twice, and it makes their butt hurt, and they hang it in the garage, and that's the end of that.
Right, and it's even older than that. Like, this is basic gamification, right? What anyone who's in a software, where Google and Facebook have teams of people who specifically study just the psychology of gaming, right? Which is why you'll notice every 90 days or so, Facebook and Google come out with new little twists. Oh, there's an update. Here's a new thing you can do. Here's a check mark now. Here's a different type of a like. Oh, I can add this function, because they realize people get bored after 90 days. You know, plus or minus, might be 120. Who knows? A few months. Oh, got to re-up it. Got to do something different. And that little dopamine hit in your head is like, oh, okay, now I'm back. But it doesn't provide you an infrastructure for balance, and it doesn't provide you an infrastructure for long-term success. And that's really what, on our book, that's what we wanted to help you understand is, I want you, when you put that $300 down, or you make that lifestyle change that says, damn it, like, I'm taking back my life right now, or I'm going to make this goal, I'm going to qualify for Boston, or whatever it is you are, when that motivation hits you, I want you to start building for long-term success, so that after 90 days you don't just give up and quit. And what we see now is the way that these applications and that these technologies are marketed to you, and the way people are being told to use them, is only set so that you lose motivation, and then they hit you next Christmas special with a new one with a new twist, and you rebuy it. Yeah, I'm tired of my old Fitbit. That didn't matter. Now I want the Fitbit that also tells me when to take a drink of water. Perfect. That's what I need. That'll help me stay reminded to be hydrated. That's fantastic. Great. That's what I need. And then you get tired of that, and then the next one adds on. Also, this will tell you when to take a breath. That's great. That's fantastic. I need to breathe more. And you see the cycle here. Your money gets lost. You keep spending money on apps to support companies that don't give a crap about your actual health or performance.
And some of the devices that have come out are truly absurd. I mean, like, they've just gone totally beyond the pale. My favorite one that came out was the smart water bottle. And I'm like, it's a clear bottle. I can see how much I'm drinking. You just look at the bottle, and I don't get it.
Right? It's unreal. So it's a question of putting your motivation in the wrong spot. Is your motivation there to actually achieve that goal so that you can feel better and say like, oh, I got my level? Or is the motivation something deeper? And that's what we want to push to, is setting up a positive long-term relationship with your body. It's getting calibration so that you physically understand it and you feel it. So you go, you know what? I'm feeling like I'm in a crappy mood right now. I'm feeling run down. I'm feeling thirsty. Any of these things. Versus, well, you know, like, I thought I felt good this morning, but my heart rate variability app told me that I guess I'm tired today. I guess I have to take a, like this is nonsense. You're outsourcing your own physiology to some quote-unquote smart technology.
Right.
And I'm telling you right now, those technologies are not very smart.
They're not that smart. And even when they are pretty good, they're turning off something inside you if you rely on them all the time. One of the things I noticed since Google Maps became ubiquitous on smartphones and had live traffic updates and reroutes, and it's very good. Like, as an app, it's really good. So I use it all the time. Like, even when I'm driving home from a place that I know, I'm like, well, I want to know the fastest way to get there because I'm an entrepreneur and all these things, and I need to get there as quick as I can.
Right.
Because I don't know how to get anywhere anymore. Like, no. I have lost the ability, and I probably should fix this at some point. I've lost the ability to figure out how to get anywhere.
Yeah.
Same thing if you're looking at your watch or looking at your cycling computer, or if you've got a thing attached to your barbell that tells you how fast it moves and all those things.
Yep. And then what happens when your phone dies?
I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
I had this happen to me in a race once. So early on in my running career, if you can call it that, I was using a pacer at a half marathon, and he cramped at mile 9. I mean, it happens. Like, I was really angry at him at the time. Like, how do you be a pacer? So he pulls up lame, like his calf knotted up and he couldn't run. And he says, just go on, you're doing great, you'll finish. And I'm like, bro, I haven't thought about my own pace since we started. I'm just following you. I had no idea how to finish that race.
Exactly. Do you know, did you hear the Michael Phelps story from Beijing when his goggles broke?
Yeah.
I mean, it's phenomenal. If you haven't heard this, Bob Bowman, Phelps' like 20-plus year coach, just told this story a few months ago. What happened basically was, this was Phelps's, I can't remember which gold he was going for, but I think it was the 200-meter breaststroke. Or no, 200-meter fly, I think, and this is Beijing. And he gets down about halfway through, and his goggles break and start filling up with water. And so he basically has to either open up his eyes and look through trying to see through burning water, etc., or close his eyes and finish. But the point was, he can't see. And so he actually goes on and finishes, breaks a world record, gets first, but when he touches the wall, you can see him, he reaches up and he grabs his goggles and he throws his goggles, and he's sitting there looking pissed. And the announcers are like, what the hell happened? Like, he just broke world record again, won another gold. Why is he so pissed? And nobody knew. Well, he was pissed because his goggles broke, and they asked him afterwards, and he said, well, you know, Coach Bowman always made us, he would never tell us our times, and a lot of times in practice, he would make us count our strides or our strokes to the wall, and made us feel the water. So we had to tell whether or not how far we were. So when he was halfway through that race, and his technology, even the simple technology like a goggle, when it failed on him, he had spent so many years learning to feel what that race felt like, he knew exactly where to default and go right back to. And what's crazier about it is, not only did he have to memorize how many strokes he had to get to the wall, but that's not that particularly difficult. Like, how many of you can close your eyes and swim in a straight line?
Right.
No way.
Kidding. Yeah.
Not only do you have to swim in a straight line, dude, you have to swim in a perfectly straight line, because if you waver back and forth a half a meter, that's the difference between gold and not gold, and that's definitely not breaking a world record. So he had to not only know exactly where he was going, but he had to do it in a perfectly straight line to break a world record. That's because he, as an expert, spent his entire life developing as an athlete, learning to feel his body, learning to feel where he's at in the water, closing his eyes or whatever drill he was doing, and gaining that internal calibration, not just outsourcing everything to the technology, because what happens when it fails?
Well, that's the difference between a technician and a master, right? A technician does the motions because they're following a checklist, and a master understands the why and can improvise and overcome unexpected things.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we've touched on using technology to calibrate your understanding of what you're actually doing, and I've found that immensely useful in my own training. Like, man, I'm really running like shit today. What's going on? I look down, my heart rate's way high because it's really hot outside. I'm like, oh, well, yeah, I'm not cut off early.
Right.
But one of the things, like our instincts, because we live in such an artificial, tool-enhanced world, our instincts are totally broken. So
Yeah.
at what point, I mean, does technology become a permanent crutch just because we're always going to be a little bit handicapped by the world we live in?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be. Let's be real. None of us are going to go live out like Dick Prenneke and go live in Alaska for 35 years with no technology, right? and that's fair. I don't even think we should. But what we have to do is at least just be conscious of the technology and be conscious of what's going on. And as long as we can be aware of it, then I think we can make better choices. So the phrase that I use, and I got this from my father and my grandfather. They had the same exact approach, but a guy named Jocko Willink put a name to it, which is detach. So you can overcome a lot of situations if you can learn to detach and look at things objectively. So if you're having that crappy run, you know, an emotional person would look down and be like, oh, heart rate says this, or the technology-dependent person would say, my app says this, therefore I do X. Right? But a more logical approach would detach from the situation and say, my heart rate's here, my running pace is here. Okay, now, why do I care? Am I upset about this because I'm so egotistical that I have to beat my time from yesterday? And if so, is that really the point of the run today? Why am I out here? Once you can do that, then you can reassess the situation and then go, oh, okay, actually, I'm doing this for the purposes of just getting a workout because I need to blow off some stress. Well, then who gives a crap about the heart rate? Throw it away. Or, yes, actually, I'm in the middle of competition and I need to hit this mileage for this. Okay, maybe that's a different approach. Maybe it's not, though. So as long as you can detach from the situation emotionally and look at things logically from what they are, then even if you're still using the technology a lot, you can become just much more successful in how you implement it and not letting it control your life.
And this is where coaches come in, right? This is where a good coach can help you overcome the fear of what your device is telling you and give you the understanding that it's just a number and there are other things going on that you may not understand that will allow you to overcome that.
Yeah, those are just like small indicators of what's going on.
Right.
Right. It's like you know, in your car. Imagine the old one. It's just like the light comes on. Right. Something's going on. Some maintenance issue.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. Well, I don't know exactly what it is, and it might not even matter. It might just simply be that the light for the maintenance issue light is on. There's not actually anything going on. It's just the light has gone short-circuited, so now it's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But a coach would know that. So if you drove around all day, every single time you drove your car, you had someone with the mechanical engineering expertise riding around with you. And after 20 years, something goes on, he's going to be able to look at that, I can hear the difference here. No, this is not really a problem. Or, yeah, and I can tell when you started the car, the starter's going crap.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to be able to know that, where it's going to be difficult for you. So the other issue is, as we move forward from the coaching perspective, a lot of young coaches I see right now are going in with the approach saying, I need to be able to be the expert. Like, I'm going to get a job because I will be the expert in GPS monitoring, I'll be the expert in HRV, et cetera, and that's what's going to get me a job because companies are going to want that, sports teams are going to want that. Well, that's a good approach, but I think it's pretty short-sighted because, number one, everyone's doing that. Number two, any of these professional athletes have teams of software engineers behind their technologies, not sports scientists. It's a software engineer.
Right.
They're going to continue to have these things. But more importantly, if you never develop those skills on your own as a coach of being able to identify an athlete, of what's going on with them just by seeing them and being around them and being able to fix them without technology, you're never going to have that skill set, and you're going to be toasted as a long-term coach because you are going to be only as good as the limited technology.
Yeah.
And that thing, as we already discussed, is extremely inaccurate. So now your entire livelihood is being outsourced to really cheap, inaccurate technology that, guess what, gets turned over every couple of years.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate to work with a handful of very old school coaches for my own development, and it kind of came to a very acute point last year, in the fall of last year. I ran a half marathon here locally and had a out-of-body experience performance. I had a great race. Went way beyond what I thought I could do, but it was a tune-up race, so I kind of didn't care if I blew up. I was just trying to see where I was at, and I ended up not blowing up. So I go to my coach the next week. I go to track practice, and I'm like, hey, I ran this time, And you know what? My big race is at Indianapolis. What do you think I should do there? And he tells me a time that's like 5 minutes faster than I just ran. And I was like, you're out of your damn 5 minutes and a half marathon is an eternity. Like
Yeah, of course.
there's no way in hell. But what did I have to lose? So he's been running since like running was invented. He ran for Bob Schull in the 80s. Like he's running Yoda. Like he's the guy. So I have total trust in him. So I get to my race in Indianapolis and I start running and I get bottled up at the start because way too many people started way too far forward. And I'm like, well, there goes my race. There's no way I'm going to reel this thing back in. I'm already 90 seconds behind 3 miles into the race. Well, what have I got to lose? Coach says I can run this time. So to get that time, I do the quick math in my head. I need to run the rest of my miles at this pace. So let's see. So I run 1 mile at that pace and I'm fine. And I just keep doing the 1 mile at a time thing. And sure enough, the guy who's been coaching runners for 30 years had been watching me run at track practice, had been watching my results through the year, and was able to say, if everything lines up weather-wise, you're going to be able to do this time no matter what happens. And sure enough, there it went. And my watch, meantime, was yelling at me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I have the alarms turned off, but I was watching my heart rate on the screen, and it's like at 34 years old, or at 33 years old at the time, all the math says I shouldn't be able to hold a 172 heart rate for an hour.
Yep.
But that's exactly what I did. And it worked out fine. So that was.
It doesn't understand context. It doesn't understand emotion. It doesn't understand psychology. It doesn't understand game day. It doesn't understand practice day. Slept last night. Didn't sleep last night. Super jacked up. Adrenaline. That stuff is completely out of context for it. So I'm not surprised. But what's interesting, and like I love this. One thing I love about runners or endurance athletes, cyclists are good about this too. Mm-hmm. Swimmers less so, but especially runners, cyclists. If I tell you right now, Go run me a 6-minute mile. With no technology, I guarantee you'll get a 6-minute mile within probably like a couple seconds. Like if I say, all right, go run me a 5:40, you go crush that. If I say go run me a 6:20, like runners are so dialed with those things, and we've done this a bunch. And you take that technology, but that's because they spend so much time calibrating. What's that feel like? And then your nerves were actually because you were so calibrated, going, hey, I cannot keep this 5:20 pace for this many miles or whatever it was. But I could kick a 5:30 pace. So you'd be confident that close. And once you said, no, I don't really care, or move that away, and you detached from the situation, in this case you just believed in your coach, and you didn't rely upon that technology, look what happened to your performance. So if we never get to that place, how are we shorting ourselves and undermining our own abilities when we continue to rely on technology that is, one, inaccurate, two, doesn't have context?
We've talked about calibrating. Let's talk about what we're calibrating to, right? So you're calibrating, in my case, a heart rate or a cadence or a breathing pattern to a rate of perceived effort that I think I can sustain for a certain amount of time. What are some other areas that people would be calibrating with technology? So
just general feeling, mood, energy. All right, so I think we use this as an example, but imagine that you had an app on your phone or on your watch, we'll just go with your watch, that told you continuous real-time blood sugar levels. Cool, all right, and that's technology is available, by the way. And you could say, okay, we're trying to figure out how to get the best diet for you, and you're deciding whether you want to go high carb or you want to go low carb or ketogenic or what do you want to do, and you don't know because you've heard people argue back and forth, are carbs bad, I'm not sure, I'm so confused. Well, who cares? Let's do a little test. Let's have you wake up in the morning and have what do you think is a good breakfast, and we'll do 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different breakfasts for you. And for the hour before breakfast and then 2 or 3 hours after, I want you to continually look at your blood glucose. Well, that's a good use of technology. It's going to tell you. But where that can be harmful is, say you have a bagel and orange juice for breakfast, and your heart and your blood glucose spikes and goes way up. Well, do you feel different? Do you not feel different? A bad use of technology would then be, okay, well, I'm only going to eat foods that don't spike my blood sugar. And every time I eat, I'll find all the foods that don't spike my blood sugar. Well, that would be an extremely limited approach, and that will fail. I guarantee it. A better approach is to say, okay, let's start there, but now can you match that number on your watch with what you're actually feeling? That's going to be success. And so you can look at the watch and go, well, it says my blood sugar is not spiking, but man, I'm feeling really groggy. I'm just not having a good day. My stomach's kind of That's more important. I bet, though, you would get to a spot where you go like, oh, I'm feeling terrible. I'm zonked out. I really need coffee. And then you look down and you realize, oh, I went through this huge spike and then this whole huge lull. So now I don't need the technology anymore. Now I know, and eventually I'll start to figure out when I have these foods, under these circumstances, under these preparations, in these combinations, oh, I start to feel that. I'm starting to feel that crap come on. All right, I got to stay away from that. And that's another example of calibration that we want to get to, is can you just start to feel what your body is telling you? Pain is another example, right? Brian McKenzie, my co-author, uses it all the time. He's like, pain is nature's best signaling mechanism. It is your heart rate monitor beeping at you. It is your alarm clock saying something's wrong here. So when you're going out for your run every day, you're like, God, my right heel, just right below my heel, between my heel and my toe, like that under arch right there is always hurting. Well, that's your body's way of telling you you're not moving correctly. We need to get you into a better running pattern because something's going off, mechanics are broken. Right? A watch is never going to tell you that. An app's never going to tell you that. It's just going to tell you, Bobby, you didn't hit your 10,000 steps today. But there's no context. So all of these things are calibrations to helping you understand how am I moving, how am I feeling, where am I at. And these are really unlimited of what you can calibrate it to, but it all comes down to the same thing. Like, are you calibrated to your own physiology?
The underlying theme that I'm hearing is it's not the metric, it's not even the number of metrics, it's not even necessarily the context, it's the value that you put on the number. So if you've got any piece of data, a good example is some friends of mine, a lot of friends of mine, because I'm in the CrossFit community too, I'm going gluten-free. Every time I eat gluten, it makes me really tired. Well, okay, sure. I mean, that could be fine. So eat a bunch of gluten and go to bed, and you'll probably sleep. I mean, depending on your physiology and stuff, like downregulation is a fine thing to do. You need it. So if you eat a slice of pizza and it makes you sleepy, go to sleep.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's really, really good. A very side note here that I'll just tease the audience with. But yeah, like we have extensive data now suggesting, guess what? Eating before you go to bed, I mean, especially carbohydrate, it doesn't make you fat.
No.
Right?
But there are whole careers built on that.
Yeah, and so this is the beauty of science. Science is founded on this concept of ignoramus, which is the admission of wrong, right? So everything in science is right until we find out it's wrong. And this is another example. So I'll leave you on that, but yes, I mean, that's a fantastic point. It's not good or bad, like, it makes me tired. Well, great. If it makes you tired, there's probably something going on in your lifestyle, and you're probably underslept. What's probably happening is this: you're not sleeping enough, or your quality of sleep is not good enough. So you wake up in the morning and you caffeinate. Oh, okay, great. And then you eat your gluten, and then, of course, you get tired. Is it really the gluten that made you tired? Or were you walking around all day, should have been feeling tired, but you compromised the feeling of tired by optimizing a certain style of eating as well as over-caffeinating or overstimulating? So really, is it the gluten? Like, I don't think so. Unless you're eating just massive bowls of gluten, I really, really doubt that's the problem.
Everybody loves gluten flakes, man.
Exactly. By the way, on this one, this always irritates me. Gluten is not a carbohydrate, by the way.
No, it's a protein.
It's a protein. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah.
It's attached, but not the same thing.
Can be, yeah.
Yeah. The last one I want to touch on is sleep. So sleep is the least understood, hardest to quantify, hardest to just like get a handle on for a lot of people. For my part, there is not a morning where I would not just rather stay in bed for 2 or 3 more hours. Like if I set my alarm clock for 9 a.m., it's the same feeling as if I set my alarm clock for 6 a.m. I'd like to be in bed. That's just how I am. Like I'm a stay up late guy, whatever. So where is technology useful? Or is technology even useful yet for calibration for your sleep?
Yeah, I think it can be. There are, whether you're talking things like heart rate variability or HRV or any of those bioinformatic things, there are also some technologies that allow you to assess what some people call sleep quality versus sleep quantity. So you and I could both sleep for 8 hours, but you might have a much deeper sleep for that 8 hours. You're going to wake up more restful, and I'll wake up more fatigued, even though we were, quote unquote, eyes closed for the same amount of hours. And this is just something we're really starting to get a handle on, and I think that is very, very, very good, and that can help people calibrate, right? So yes, I mean, I didn't need a technology to figure this out, but I lived for a time with my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and my brother. And we would all had pretty similar lifestyles, especially on the weekends, and we would all go to bed about the same time, roughly. And consistently, my brother woke up 45 minutes before I did or something, and Natasha usually about 20 or 30 minutes before. My brother is optimized, like he functions really good at about 7:45, like 7 hours, 45 minutes of sleep. I need 8.5. I just do it. And I've just figured this out over years and years and years, and when I get up at the same time with them, I was groggy all day, etc. If they shut up for half an hour more, like I woke up and we all felt fantastic. So I just noticed that because I pay attention all the time. Like, what am I really feeling like? What are the circumstances? Where am I at? I think technology can make us more self-aware. So whether we're talking Fitbit or heart rate monitors or anything, in this case a sleep app, it can make people more aware of simply saying, oh, yeah, I'm sleeping a lot. I'm really trying. I'm really trying. Oh, but when I look back at my 2-week log, I see that actually I was up till 2 a.m. one night, and then I was up till this, and really I'm not that consistent. And it's easy for you to outsource your own responsibility when you don't have numbers sitting in your face. So I think the technology can be helpful there for accountability. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at the numbers. You did not sleep for 8 hours, or you didn't go. You went to bed at 10 p.m. and then you went to bed at 3 a.m. and then you're all over the place. We know you can't sleep well that way. So I think that stuff is all very, very helpful. But you should also, because of person-to-person variability is so high, you should be paying attention to what you feel like. Realistically, let's take the coffee away. Let's take all the other things away. Let's take the 3 o'clock in the afternoon, bad attitude, cranky at work, right? Like, all that should be noted. Like, oh boy, how did a fight? Was it funny that the day you had a fight was after 2 weeks of really crappy sleep? Probably not, right? Or you haven't exercised in 3 weeks. You haven't done any meditation or breathing or whatever it is that you do. Well, okay, like, this is what's going on. So yeah, I do think it's not like anything else. It can be very, very helpful for accountability. It can be very helpful for calibration. But we need to really learn to understand to feel these things.
To wrap it all up, and people need to read the book because there's so much more ground to cover with all this stuff.
And more importantly, sorry to cut you off here, but just I don't want to forget to say this. I hate it when people complain and just whine and bitch.
Dude. Your words to God's ears, man.
Show up with a solution. If you don't show up with a solution, get the hell out of my face.
Right.
Sorry for the language, but this is, where I'm at. So before we leave, like, the book is specifically about the solutions to these problems. Right. It's not just a complaint or yelling about, hey, we got to do this stuff more. So in the back, in the last couple of chapters, there are training and workout programs. There are our prescription for, hey, if you've never done anything like this, here's how you get started with some cold stuff, or here's how often I think you should maybe explore some fasting. You've done this a lot, and so we have different standards based on your level of starting place. So Tim Ferriss, who some of you may have heard of.
Yeah, he's around.
I was just with him last week in New York, which was pretty awesome, by the way.
Yeah.
It's like a feeding frenzy around him, man.
I can't even imagine.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
But he contributed a section of the book, too, so he wrote like a top 10 list, his top 10 list for a bunch of little hacks and tips for doing this stuff. Stephen Kotler wrote his 10 tips for help getting you into what's called flow, or getting into the zone, and how nature can help with that and things like that. So it is a solutions-based book, is the biggest thing I want to add there. And again, I apologize for cutting you off, but I want to make sure people understand that. It's just not just me, my philosophy, complaining about technology. It's how to actually make some changes.
Yeah, there's actionable advice that you can do right now today to make yourself more independent of your technology. The one thing I will say is I feel like the title of the book is kind of a false flag. It's not unplugged necessarily. It's get smarter. Like, pair your data and your technology with context and understanding, and that's going to be your step forward instead of allowing these little devices with tiny little microchips to do the thinking for you. It's about bringing it all in.
Yeah, well, that's why you're right. The subtitle, though, I think is more appropriate, which is evolve from technology to upgrade your fitness, performance, and consciousness. And those words were chosen very specifically because it was not, let go of technology. It's not remove. It's saying technology gets you to a certain level, and that's great. And let's now evolve, which is to progress and move forward.
Right. Because
of those stepping stones. Well, sometimes we couldn't have gotten where we needed to get without that technology. So it's not a detach. It's not a let go. It's take that as a stepping stone, and now let's progress to the final place.
And John Green is a young adult author and YouTube star, and he's fond of saying that the truth resists simplicity. I like that because it personifies truth, and you're never going to get in the title of a book the totality of the advice that you need to follow. So you got to read the whole thing all the way to the end. Especially, I think starting at chapter 9 is where the meat and potatoes of how you're going to actually change your life starts. I'll wrap it up with just a general question. Mount Rushmore has fallen down. We're putting up a new one. Who are the 4 faces that you put on the new Mount Rushmore of fitness?
Oh my gosh. Oh, boy, that's really, really hard.
You're not allowed to say Mike Bledsoe.
Man, I don't know if I could even help you with that one. I would say the first one that jumped out to me, honestly, is Alton Brown from the TV show Good Eats.
Okay.
I think he did so much positive on teaching people basics of eating.
Yeah.
And how to cook and how to prepare and how to make science interesting. And he, especially later in his career when he got more inclined to health.
Right.
And he's like, I probably should stop giving these crappy. But he did a cooking show that changed a generation of people, that made guys want to watch a cooking show, because it's not a cooking show at all.
Right.
So even though he's not really in the field, I would give him maybe, at least he'd be on my short list.
Yeah, no, he's number one. Absolutely. I'll buy that.
He's fantastic. I mean, it's hard to pass up Kelly Starrett from what he's done from the movement and the injury reduction and quality of life, and now specifically what he's doing with his stand-up kids program, where he's getting stand-up desks put into a bunch of elementary schools that are just riddled with obesity. You know,
and giving a lot of information away for free. That's always been the thing that impresses me so much about him. He's like, I don't care. Rising tide raises all ships. Everybody needs to know this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, he's fantastic. That foundation's been just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Him and Juliet are doing great with that, and getting kids. I mean, the school they just took over had something. Don't quote me exactly here, but it was something insane. Like 80 or 85% of the kids in that elementary school were obese.
Holy cow!
And so now they're going in and getting stand-up desks in there and stuff and moving them. And the numbers they're finding after a year of implementation are just outrageously successful. So
too awesome.
Yeah. He would say that, and there's probably a bunch more that I'm blanking on. I tend to not get like bogged up in people in their super like minutia with their new training things. So people that are really doing this on a big scale, that are wide-ranging. Yeah. Kenny Kane is another guy who's probably no one's probably ever heard of, but he was really the guy that he has a phenomenal training program where it's called Mastery Method.
Okay.
And he basically says, like, all right, how do we actually integrate all these different practices that are all, quote unquote health, and put them all under one umbrella that's usable, that doesn't break people. And that, I think, was a key. When I first heard him give that Mastery Method thing and use this word context, and I've actually seen a bunch of people now writing books and like putting this stuff in there without giving credit to him, but like he was really good about being like, this is how often we go hard, this is how often we should be developing skill, and this is how often we're practicing and things like that. So his approach, I think, is extremely sustainable and will work is scalable, I guess is the big word. So
well, and talk about an effective use of quantification, right?
Yeah.
That's using the technology, using the numbers correctly to make better human beings. You got one more, man. You're powering through. I'm proud of you.
Okay. My last one, I would say, would be another one that maybe you've not heard of, Leslie Schilling.
Well, that is a new one. Okay.
So Leslie has a new book, in the last year or two, called Born to Eat.
Okay.
And she's a fantastic nutritionist. She used to be the nutritionist for the Memphis Grizzlies, the NBA team, and a bunch of other stuff. But her approach to setting up nutrition so that it doesn't ruin you mentally, and she specifically has mostly worked with females and mostly worked with eating disorders. But the new book, Born to Eat, is about kids and developing kids on sustainable eating and what it's like to feed them and how you can make it realistic, but also getting them to eat real food and that whole structure. So I just followed her stuff for a long time, and she's sort of gone under the radar for a very, very, very long time. But like, if you look at my social media, like, I seriously retweet like everything she writes, and she's phenomenal. So she's great. Yeah.
Awesome. So I like that question because it gets people to look at other really cool stuff that sometimes they wouldn't have known about otherwise. And I think I'm going to turn our other host, Shane Trotter, onto Leslie Schilling because that's right up his alley. He's an educator and youth development coach.
Okay.
So that'll be his jam. That'll be really cool. Dr. Galpin, thank you so much for your time. We went over what we normally do, but just a lot of really cool conversation, a lot of really cool stuff to cover. Unplugged, Evolve from Technology to Upgrade Your Fitness, Performance, and Consciousness is the book. It's been out for a month now. It is number 7 in exercise and fitness already on Amazon and only picking up steam. Thanks for your time, and I hope to work with you again soon.
Pleasure, man. Thank you.